thank you to everyone here with us
Anda agamanya apa?
right
Islam. Iya,
now.
kenapa? Karena saya yakin yang paling
We'll start
benar
the session.
Islam
So,
menurut saya. Tapi
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
dengan keyakinan yang militan
Wassalatu
seperti ini, itu tidak mengurangi toleransi saya kepada pemeluk agama lain.
ajma'in.
Dan itu dilakukan oleh Nabi Muhammad
warahmatullahi
SAW.
Thank you all for
Nabi
joining us
Muhammad yang
today.
Muslim
This
itu
event is
hampir
currently
setiap
live
hari
on Facebook and
beliau
Radio
sepulang
IMSA,
dari
as
masjid
well
menyuapi
as
Yahudi yang
you
buta.
here, of course.
Ya kan?
Massive thank you to
Bisa
Ombudik
toleran ya
and
dengan
Radio
agama
IMSA
lain.
team for helping us
Bisa toleran
with
dengan
the
orang
streaming.
munafik. Bisa
Thank you to
toleran
every
dengan orang
person
yang
who played a
memusuhinya.
part in developing
Jadi
this event.
militansi ideologis
I'd
itu
also like to make
tidak
a major
secara
shout out
otomatis
to the
identik
IMSA
dengan
Youth team.
intoleransi. Nah, seseorang
However,
toleran sekarang itu ditarik.
Before we
Ditarik-tarik
begin
namanya
our
toleran itu
discussion
apa?
today, I'd like
Ya,
to introduce
sekali lah
our
anak-anak
event
kita ajak ke
and
gereja.
our goals for this
Biar
evening,
tahu. Nanti
or
minggu depan
afternoon if
diajak ke
you're on the West
sinagog.
Coast.
Minggu depannya
So,
lagi
as you
diajak
can
ke
tell by the
pura.
title,
Dengan
youth
alasan
involvement in activism,
mengajarkan
advocacy, and
pluralisme.
affecting
Padahal ini
change, we will
menyesatkan.
be
Kalau kita
discussing
melakukan
youth
ini,
involvement
itu yang
and
diinginkan Yahudi.
community
Itu yang diinginkan.
engagement.
Itu yang disebut
So,
dengan milah mereka.
right off the
Keinginan
bat, if you
mereka
have any
apa?
questions
Menghilangkan
regarding
militansi
this
ideologis
subject,
itu.
please feel
Jadi
free
agar
to type
seorang
them
muslim
in
itu,
the
saya
chat
masuk
or
gereja
even
mah biasa.
privately
Nanti
message me
buka
through Zoom.
bersama
I believe I'm
dengan
under the
para
outreach
pendeta di
department
gereja.
right now, so feel free
Padahal itu
to
aslinya
DM me
melecehkan.
there.
Nanti lama-lama
But yeah,
tarawih bersama
we hope
di
that
gereja.
it is obvious that the
Nah, itu nggak
timing
boleh
of
karena
this
ada batasan-batasan
conversation is
toleransi.
due to
Berkaitan dengan
recent
ideologi
events
seperti itu kita
with
harus
respect
militan.
to police
Nggak bisa.
brutality and also
Nah,
the urge to
hanya
speak out
beberapa hal
on
yang masih debatable yang
injustices
mungkin kita tidak
occurring
bahas
around
ya.
the
Itu
world, particularly
menurut
to the Black
perspektifnya
community.
beda-beda.
We
Misalnya,
know
boleh nggak
that
kita
as
ngucapin
Muslims we're
selamat
taught
Natal
to stand in the name
atau
of
ucapan ya
justice,
itu
and
perspektif yang
that if
masih
we see an
berbeda-beda di
evil,
antara para ulama. Meskipun kita
we
di
should
sini
change
di
it with our
Indonesia
hands,
lazimnya itu
and if not our hands, then our
sensitif ketika
tongues, and if
membahas
not
itu.
our tongues, then our
Lebih
hearts.
condong
So we
untuk
hope to
kita
address this
tinggalkan.
and also
Padahal dalam
hope to just
dunia
spark a general
internasional
broader
muslim atau para
discussion
ulama
on
itu
community
masih bisa
involvement.
diperdebatkan.
So
Tapi kalau sudah
we
masuk kepada
are
ranah
centering
fisik
our youth
misalnya,
here today
kita
with
sholat
our
berjamaah di
panelists
gereja itu
because
tidak
there's
diperbolehkan.
always
Buka
so much
bersama,
that we can learn
acara-acara yang
from
berbau
our peers,
keagamaan.
our younger
Nah,
siblings,
ini
our
yang
older
mungkin kita
siblings,
harus
and for some of you
jelaskan
here,
bahwa
our children,
ini
or
larinya ke
rather your
pluralisme.
children actually.
Jadi paham semua agama benar
I'd like to start
sehingga
by
nilai
introducing
utama
our three
dari sebuah
panelists here
keyakinan itu kita
today.
ditiadakan. Ini
Just
yang
a quick
pertama
personal
ya.
note that I've
Nah,
worked closely
makanya
with each
Allah
of
ingin
them
menunjukkan
or
kul
have seen
inna
their
hudallah.
community work
Saya ketika
firsthand. So
memeluk
I'm
agama
looking
Islam,
forward to
selain
the
Islam salah.
discussion and
Itu
the
harus.
knowledge that they have to share with
Lihat,
us
bahkan
from
jangankan
their
yang
experiences.
pokok seperti ini. Imam Syafi'i apa katanya? Imam Syafi'i
Firstly,
rahimahullah mengatakan,
Umar is a
pendapat
rising
saya ini
senior.
benar menurut saya.
Sorry,
Tapi
got that
kemungkinan
wrong.
salah
That is
ada.
my sibling. I know.
Oh ya,
No,
Tamil.
anyways. So firstly,
Dia
Umar is a rising junior at Washington University in St. Louis. In high school, Umar helped lead a solidarity march to the local masjid and also organized the local chapter of March for Our Lives in Champaign. Umar's also started inter-school diversity and activism initiatives in Champaign-Urbana. Also here with us today is Musa. Musa is a junior at Wayne State University in Detroit. Besides his involvement with IMSA, he has also been part of local activism initiatives in Detroit, such as protests and interfaith organizations. Our next panelist is Hanan. So Hanan is a rising... I'm gonna mute you. That's cool. Okay.
Sorry.
It's okay. You're okay. Our next panelist is Hanan. Hanan is a rising high school senior from Ohio who is an active competitor in both mock trial and speech and debate. Throughout her high school career, she has been involved in youth leadership programs and has been serving on her local masjid's youth committees. In the past year, Hanan has worked for the Council on American Islamic Relations, so CARE's Columbus chapter, and has participated in efforts to combat human trafficking, including speaking at an anti-human trafficking workshop and the Youth Human Trafficking Prevention Summit at the Ohio State House. So before we open for questions to the panelists, which again, you can send me through the chat, I'd now like to ask each of the panelists to talk a little more about community engagement and the importance of such activities, how it pertains to them, especially perhaps given these times. Maybe we could start from Musa, inshallah?
Oh, yeah, sure. All right. Assalamualaikum everyone. Inshallah y'all are all doing great today. So I guess like Zahra mentioned already, it's first like being involved like in the community and socially like within like social change and trying to be like actual factors and like helping to make that change is something that is also like part of us, like what we should do as Muslims. Like how she mentioned the hadith of, you know, changing it with your hands or then your mouth or then your tongue or your heart. So obviously, like we know as Muslims that we should do that, but then also just as people, like seeing, especially like to keep it relevant with what's happened in the recent past for like many people of the Black community, and I guess like it's been happening for a while, but obviously it's like been brought to more attention. And when we see stuff like this happen to like a specific community, and obviously like in many cases, like for example in the example like George Floyd, it's stuff that like they're getting punished for that they don't deserve at all. They're not criminals. They're just regular people like all of us. And when we see something like that happen, we should I guess we should just be it should just motivate us to like be involved and to not just like sit in the sideline. And like a lot of people are saying is that at this point it's not okay to kind of sit back and be like, oh yeah, I'm not racist, like so alhamdulillah, like I'm doing my job. Like besides, of course, like we shouldn't be racist or we shouldn't have racist thoughts or act on that. But besides that, especially now that we're seeing like it's been so long and like so little has really changed, it's time to not just not just be content or not just be like happy with not being racist, but also being like going out of our way if we can, and you know like what we're comfortable with, to go against racism and to be involved in whatever social cause it is, you know, like whether it's here, whether it's around the world.
Oh, once he
And
was in, yeah, because he's been ignoring me. No, he's not in.
uh so should I keep going? Yeah, so yeah, so like yeah, so like I mentioned, it's just I guess like what we've seen, that it's been so long, but our society is still at a point like, or our people are still at a point where like literally down the road someone can literally like choke someone to death, and like that's like not even the first time that it's happened. That kind of really shows us that it's time for everybody to, and like I said, it's about like do it within like what you're comfortable with. Like it's not like I barely do anything, so I'm not really like out here like telling y'all like to like go out here and like change the world or nothing like that. But it's, I guess what I'm just trying to say is that it's time to say that like it's not enough to not be racist, but we should be like out of our way to be against people who are racist, at least in like our own families, like friends, and like not be afraid to like speak up against like anything that we see. So I guess like that's why like I try to like be involved. Like I said, I'm definitely like far from the best, but that's why I try to like be involved like as much as I can. And inshallah, I think like that's maybe like why we can all try to be involved too. So is that
That's great, Musa. Thank you. So yeah, I think just the acknowledgement that we can all be involved at our own personal comfort levels is a good reminder. And I mean, we've seen this a lot recently, that like it starts from your home, it starts from having your own conversations, things of that sort. So yeah, always a good reminder to have. Next, if we could hear from Hanan, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I feel like Musa covered a lot already. And you just asked kind of like why being involved in our communities is important to us individually. Just want to like circle back to your initial prompt. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, like I said earlier, Musa really covered it well. I think personally, something that I always come back to when I am getting involved in community work is I went to this masjid event when I was a sophomore, and they're just talking about like Black history and in conjunction with like Muslim history. And we watched this documentary on YouTube about Mahmoud Abdurraouf, who is a basketball player, and he sat during the national anthem because he believes that to stand for oppression wasn't consistent with his, you know, his beliefs as a Muslim. And that was really powerful. I had never heard about him before, and just that whole event was, it was just about Black leaders and how far we've come because of them, not just as Muslims, but as, you know, human beings in America. And I circled back to that one ayah in Surah An-Nisa, O you who believe, be standing firmly for justice, even if it be against your own self. And so I think that's what kind of drives like community involvement to me. I benefit so much from like the programs and the resources around me, and my brothers and sisters who are Black and
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
all people of color. And I think it would not be right to not be involved and fight for others' rights when I benefit so much from the people who have come before me. So that's why it's important.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
That's great, Hanan. Yeah, it's always really good. I think it's not acknowledged as often as it needs to be that really Black Muslims are largely the foundation of Muslims in America to begin with. Often skimmed over, even nowadays. So always a good reminder to have. So lastly, Umar, if you would like to add to that.
Yeah, I think Hanan and Musa made like some really good points about like obviously the importance of like solidarity with Black Muslims and how much the Black community has helped us throughout our history in America. And then I think also I think for me personally, I think you look at all of these like historical events you learn growing up, like the Civil Rights Movement, and these great like changes in history and like or even like in Islamic history, like standing up for change. And you sort of like wonder to yourself like, oh man, what would I have done then? What could I have done? Would I have been able to do the same? And there are moments like this where you can like demonstrate what you would have done and you can participate in those moments on your own. And I think it's very easy to sort of forget that and to sort of feel like, I think especially with like the internet, on the one hand, like it informs us of all these like events and social injustices, but it also feels overwhelming because it feels like everything's going wrong and like what can we do? But like that's also what it's felt like for every other community at every other point in history. And we got to remember that they like stuck through that and fought through, and that this is our historical moment and we need to make the best of it that we can.
Yeah, that's a really good reminder. Yeah, there's been a lot of like memes and stuff that are essentially just basically like, oh, I didn't ask to live through a historical event. And obviously that was more towards COVID. But in terms of right now, it's clearly something that we have essentially a responsibility to take part in and things of that sort. So yeah, so thank you to the panelists for your intros. So I'd like to start off with a few questions for you all. So, mashallah, I've noticed this myself, particularly on Instagram recently, which seems to be a really effective means of spreading awareness online. And Umar, you mentioned just how quickly the internet can inform us of events and things of that sort. Why do you all think that like this form of online activism? And then additionally, what are some pros and cons of online involvement? So I'll open it up to all three of the panelists and whoever wants it. Musa, I see that you are unmuted, so I assume you want to take this question.
Oh, my bad. No, I didn't do that on purpose, but I mean, I can though. All right. So yeah, I mean, yeah, like you said, that's a really good point of how obviously like now like lots of the youth are like trying to go for or lots of people in general are using like online like so whether it's like social media like IG, Snap, Facebook, all that, or even just like the internet to like I guess you like do what or practice what you call like online activism. So I mean like I guess in terms of the pros and the cons, I don't really like use it that much to be honest myself. So I'm not like sure like all the details, but I know that definitely like one thing that's definitely like a big advantage of it is that like for example like so again like bringing it to like recent events with like the killing of George Floyd, right? And I saw obviously like there was a lot of talks and stuff that happened out of it, and I saw like I think it was some athlete or celebrity like someone was asking him or like telling him like why do you think like it was, and he wasn't a Muslim, but it was like they were asking like why do you think like it just gotten like worse and worse, like I feel like every time we turn on the TV, every time we turn on the internet, it's like a different person, you know, getting shot, getting killed. Like obviously, like with George Floyd got a lot of attention, but right before that was Breonna Taylor. You know, before that was like another person. And what he said was like, he was like, nah, like this is always how the police have been treating our community. This is always how the police have been treating us. But the only difference is that now you guys see it on like video and on camera. So I think it like that's probably the biggest advantage of like online activism, or like using online what's it called, methods, like because it just, for people who don't experience it on a day, like on a daily basis, or for people who don't live in communities where like literally like you just see a police and you automatically get scared, for example. And obviously there's so many different issues, but like to speak on like police brutality and keeping it relevant for people who don't live in communities when like that's such a big problem, like having all this online like obviously like the video that got spread that many of y'all might have seen of like the innocent man literally getting choked out, right? Like George Floyd getting choked out by the police. And now like because of that one video, and obviously like it's really sad, and like no one should have to go through that. And like I'm not trying to say it's like a happy thing out of it, but because of that video, like you're seeing like all around the world people are protesting, right? Like it's not even just in America. It wasn't just in Minnesota. Seeing like it's literally like all around the entire world protesting, right? Like, it's not even just in America. It's not. It wasn't just in Minnesota. For online activism, like it's literally like all around the entire world protesting, right? It's not even like I guess one people. It wasn't just in Minnesota. For online activism, one like it's and yeah, I guess I see that same thing. And then you yeah, I guess that's all I was gonna say.
Okay. No, that's great. Thank you, Musa. Yeah. So you brought up some really good points about how just having this online format, news gets to people really quickly, really easily, and it's able to, it allows a lot of people to tune into the same message. I really like that point as well. So yeah, okay. If Hanan or Umar had anything to add as well. At least like shake your head or something.
Right,
Okay.
I can go. Yeah, obviously, like Musa said, like I think it makes sense that you gravitate towards online activism because that's where you're getting a lot of this information. That's where you're like learning about activism in the first place. And I think it's very easy to hate on online activism as like because you're not like doing much physically. But obviously there are some like pros, like you see like a lot of donations coming in from like this wide exposure to like for bail funds and like mutual aid programs that are obviously like materially helpful to people. And obviously like getting the information out is useful for any form of activism. I think one drawback, especially for situations like this, might be that like there is obviously a limit to it. And I think people forget what that limit is, especially in a situation like this where like the problem is a very like it's a physical problem. People are being killed, people are being like shot and beaten and harassed. And like if a state force has the power to beat and harass you, they're not going to buckle down because 10,000 people signed a petition, right? That's not how that works. They're going to respond to bodies on the street disrupting their daily lives. That's how all of the major social change in the past has happened. That's how the civil rights movement happened. They didn't just get a bunch of people to sign a petition, and they weren't like they weren't. Yeah, it was a. You have to sort of like you have to recognize that like you need to make some material and like physical change as well. And it might be inconvenient. It will probably be inconvenient, but so is police brutality. So like if you want to stop inconvenient injustices, you're going to have to go out of your way to do something beyond tweeting, which is like useful. Like I think it's easy to hate on tweeting, but like it is no doubt useful, but there is a limit to what it can do.
Yeah, okay, for sure. That's a really great reminder. Yeah, on one hand, just online community has yeah, we've seen a lot of good out of it, like Omar said, in terms of bail funds, matching donations, things of that sort. But then again, yeah, it is true that to some extent, like petitions can only do so much, or not even that petitions can only do so much. Not petitions are very easy to ignore. Like, so what if a lot of people sign this? That doesn't necessarily lead to solid changes, but constantly like speaking up and actually putting your bodies on the street will effectively cause enough disruption to lead to a change, hopefully. So yeah, that's a really good reminder. Hanan, if you had a take.
Yeah, well, this is just going to be like branching off what was already said. I'm not going to go on too long about it, but for sure, I think the things that make social media and like online activism really good can also make it kind of ineffective. You know, it's a two-way thing. Information is really accessible. It's really easy to spread things. It's just a very convenient platform. But with that being said, it can be easy to feel like, oh, that's enough. Like, I'm gonna wash my hands and like I'm good now. So I think as long as we are using, you know, like that's enough activism for today kind of thing. But
Yeah.
as long as we're using, I think, our platform to move the movement forward and be creative. Like, don't just settle for reposting something. You know, I've seen that one the YouTube video that if you just stream it, it donates money, right? Like that's a really creative way to use online activism. Or I had friends who were starting a bake sale. So it's like, yes, do spread information because that is very efficient, really easy to do. I mean, just a week ago, defunding the police, people were like, that sounds crazy, like that's too far. And now everybody's like, yeah. So it is really helpful, but you have to use it really in a balanced fashion and just make sure you're being creative.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, especially in regards to sometimes it is really easy to repost. And also I think another thing is that a lot of this content is kind of easy to consume, so people don't think too critically about it. But then again, another pro is that it's also easy to turn around and be like, actually, wait, hold on. Someone brought up a good point about this. I think a really good example is that can't wait to 8 thing. Everyone was on that board like just 2 weeks ago. And then once people started saying like, actually, it's not enough to warn before shooting. It's not enough to do these things. Like we need to actually physically defund the police and not just settle for less. Then you saw a wave of people willingly educate themselves and then move from there. So yeah, that's a really great point on just the pros and cons of communicating online through this. Okay, so another question. Sorry, just give me a second. Okay, what challenges do youth face as they begin to get involved in their community, politically or otherwise, and how do you suggest overcoming it? Whoever wants to take that right off the bat. Omar Hanan Musa.
Oh yeah. So can you repeat the question again?
Yes. What challenges do youth and young adults face as they begin to get involved in their community, either politically or otherwise, and how do you suggest overcoming it?
Okay, yeah. So yeah, that's a really good question. I think that there's probably a lot of challenges that like you said, you could face. But and like I said, I don't even really do that much, so I'm not really like speaking from that much experience or nothing like that. But I would say that maybe the biggest or like one challenge that you definitely could face is like it might seem like there's so many different like ways that you can go. You know what I mean? Like social, like in terms of just like if you say social justice or like human rights or something like that, it's like there's first of all like there's just so many causes, right? Obviously, like recently that we're seeing like right here with police brutality and Black Lives Matter, but then even like other groups that also in America like are being affected, even other groups like all around the world, like what keeps happening in like Palestine, for example, the Muslims suffering in China, like and people suffering like whatever religion, whatever country, like sometimes I think like the biggest challenge might be that it's just so overwhelming. Like there's just so much going on and so much that um like so much ways you can take it. But I think like the first step, at least like to start off. So for someone like me who's like doesn't like do that much or like have that much experience, like I would say the best or the first step would be to like choose like not forget about any causes or forget about any struggles, but choose one specific. If you want to do something, choose one specific like cause or one specific like cause that you would want to like focus on right now, you know what I mean? So like whether it's like to keep it relevant again, like all these causes are worthy, but like just to keep it relevant, like the Black Lives Matter movement and how like they've been suffering from the police and just racism in this country. And then even once you choose there, I think it might still be a little overwhelming. Like, all right, so like yeah, like so Black Lives Matter, like, but where do I go from here? You know what I mean? But I think that the first step in terms of that would be to just like learn a little more about it, so like actually like what's happening to them, why do they even need to say like Black Lives Matter, why is like that should be something that's just obvious and accepted, right? But like what's happened for them to like need to go and like specifically say that. And then like you find out a little bit about like all the people who have passed away from the police, all the people who have passed away from other people like just shooting them, like what we saw recently with the Ahmaud Arbery. And then you start to see like, okay, yeah, so now I kind of like get what the issue is about. Maybe not like fully understand it, but like you kind of start to get like an idea of what it's about. And then like I guess from there is like maybe like, so if you want to like specifically go out and do something, then you can like maybe decide something like, but even if it's just like a baby step or like something like a little small, like just like a small thing that you can do, you know what I mean? So and I think like what I would suggest is that for all these causes, like sometimes there's like I mean, I know we said like a petition doesn't necessarily do that much, and that's definitely like true, but just as a first step, maybe like just even sign a petition. Or like, for example, there's so many protests right now. Like we just had one in Detroit like last weekend, and like showing up for something like that, even though it seems like I remember I went there, like there's like probably like a couple thousand people, like, but even though it seems like what am I, like I'm not really anything unique or special, like just showing your support or like just taking a small step like that, like it can like kind of go a long way. And then I guess like also always just like keep your intention for Allah, so like you can get good deeds for it at the same time. uh but that would be my thing. Like I guess to answer the question, like maybe a challenge would be that it can be really overwhelming because there's so many like ways you can take it. And then you can like, if that's how you feel or any of y'all feel, then you can like help that by like narrowing it down and just like choosing a specific like action or cause.
Yeah, that's a really good interpretation of just the question. Yeah, the fact that there are in fact a lot of causes, and there's also a lot of angles on even just one cause. So choosing to educate yourself thoroughly on one specific focus is likely a good step when you're trying to get more engaged and involved. Yeah. So Hanan or Umar, if you have any thoughts to add here.
I mean, I agree with Musa's point that like, yeah, it's not a bad thing to like hunker down and focus on one issue, because like obviously there's so much that like maybe concentrating your energy in like one specific area might be effective. One thing that I sort of ran into in like, and I think a lot of people run into when they first start getting into like activism and like beyond, taking that next step to like community organizing and like fundraising and stuff, is that I think one of the hardest things is that like you got to remember that it's a group project, right? Like most of the time you're going to be working with like a lot of other people, and like you have that starting point of like, I don't know, like March for Our Lives, for example, where like, yeah, you all agree that like, we need gun control or something. But then from there, you have so many differing opinions of how to do it, and you often get like really bogged down in like the details and the bureaucracy. And also more often than not, what you'll run into is like, not necessarily more often than not, but like in my experience, those are often white dominated spaces as well. And it can often feel sort of disheartening and overwhelming to sort of like be trying to make a change in your community, and then like for a certain group of people, and then have your voice and the voice of people who look like you sort of like drowned out. And I think it's hard to not sort of be disheartened by how, because it seems like a one-track process at first, right? It seems like, I'm gonna fight hard and I'm gonna like I'm gonna make change, but like you gotta fight hard with like all these other people who are also very passionate and who might have their own ideas of how to get things done. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out how to like get around that, because I often butt heads with people in like organizing and stuff. But I think, you got to just like remember sort of when to pick your battles, and also like remind yourselves that you're ultimately on the same side and fighting towards the same goal.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot of really good points there. Yeah, being disheartened by like white predominant spaces is very real. Being jaded by a lot of activist spaces is also a really legitimate concern, at least in my experience. I can't speak for you guys, are all young and thriving, mashallah. So, but yeah, things of that sort. There are a lot of little nitpicky details when it comes to community organizing that you run into, but yeah, it is like Umar said, always a good reminder that you're technically still fighting for the same cause. So there's just bumps in the road along the way. Yeah, Hanan, if you had anything to add there.
Yeah, this is again just like piggybacking off of like what everybody said before me, because everybody made some really good points. Something that I have noticed as like a struggle, and this is kind of also from the perspective of maybe like somebody getting involved in the community on like a smaller scale, like somebody in high school. Sometimes you feel like you lack efficacy, like you can't really make a change because I mean, half of the people in high school can't drive yet. I mean, nobody can vote yet. It just like where do I even start? And it also depends on where you live, right? Like I went to a predominantly white high school, and so it feels like I don't really have people around me that think the same or have the same issues in mind. So my suggestions or what's helped me through that kind of struggle of feeling like I didn't really have a voice or I didn't really have a way to get involved is like efficiently is don't underestimate the organizations around you. And that's not to say to like just blindly follow whatever organization, but you can always learn from other people. I think you have to start somewhere. I remember my first like large service project for this one like leadership program, they made us pair up with an organization just because it was many of our first time kind of doing something like that. And it was really, really helpful. We paired up with the Boys and Girls Club of Toledo. And it was just really cool, like seeing the work that other people were already doing. And that kind of inspired us to, you know, one day do the same thing. But you have to start somewhere. And so that being said, going back to my original point, when you feel like you don't really have that support around you, like you're just starting out, really surround yourself with people you can learn from, people you can work with, because, you know, you're not going to become like this trailblazer overnight. You have to start somewhere. And then another thing is make sure you stay sincere and genuine. I think when you enter like activist work, I don't know, and maybe it's just me, but it kind of gets to your ego sometimes. You're like, wow, I'm making a difference. I'm a leader. And that's good. Like you should be proud of the work you do. But at the same time, you have to remember that the work you do is service oriented. Like you are there to serve others. And that's not to say you can't think for yourself. Like you should be creative and contribute and be your own person. But don't assume what people need, and make sure you listen to the groups you are working with. Make sure you're listening to the communities you are trying to support, because you don't want to assume what they need. And that's happened. I've seen it happen where people come in and act like a savior, like they are going to save the day and like, wow, solve these issues. But just stay sincere and remember that like the work you are doing is for other people. Yeah.
Yeah, that was really great, Hanan. There was so much that you covered there, especially with staying sincere within just community organizing. I think a lot of the times there's two extremes. Like your ego can get really big just with the simple thought of, oh, I'm doing all this work, I'm really like striving for a change. But also a lot of community work can feel really thankless as well. It also feels like a thankless job. Like you are putting so much time and effort and money, and it just feels like you're like throwing things against the wall and nothing happens. But so there's a lot of flip sides to that. But yeah, just like Hanan said, when you stay sincere and stay true to yourself in your work and in your cause, then inshallah, the work just keeps going. So yeah, there are a few questions that we have received, inshallah. Actually, first let's start with this. Hanan, if we could start with you, if you would be comfortable with that. So what are some issues you hope would be more often addressed by Muslim spaces and organizations?
I think, and this is consistent with, why we kind of made this session, we need to talk more about like the Black Lives Matter movement. I think that's like a no-brainer. Moving forward, we need more sessions about our privilege and more practical ways to get involved. Because I think a lot of the sessions we do have, we're like, yeah, civil rights, being Muslim, it means supporting justice. And then it's like, well, what then, And I'm guilty of that too. Like, what resources should I check out first? Or, how can I take part in dismantling this systemically? So moving forward, more issues, more topics that can help us like tackle this, like racial justice in America. And then another issue I kind of want to see more in more Muslim circles is, and I don't know if I'm going to articulate this perfectly, but like women's rights. I think in a lot of Muslim communities, I've noticed like certain subtle, and I don't know if aggressions are the right term, but sometimes just like a double standard with the way sisters are treated. I remember, I'm not going to name names, but I do remember from a friend who was talking about like a female speaker who was speaking at this event, and she was just mistreated by some like uncles in the audience because of, when she was speaking and the fact that she was like a woman. And that's not like an isolated event. I see that in a lot of other circles, that they're not as respected at times, or there's always some kind of like punchline with like, oh yeah, you want to like learn more, but like how are you going to do that if you're like a mom? Like, no, I'm just a cool Muslim person doing my work. And I don't know, I want to learn more about female Muslim leaders. I feel like we have a lot of amazing role models in general, regardless of whether they are male or female. But inshallah, like there's some really, really cool Muslim leaders who are women that we don't study enough. And I'm just like, for instance, I have a list because I wanted to bring this up. Intisar Rub, she was the only Muslim law professor who wears a hijab in America at Harvard Law. And she's the director of the Islamic Legal Studies program at Harvard Law School. Or Fatima Al-Fifi, the founder of the oldest university still in operation today. And I want to hear more about these women. But yeah, that's what I'd say.
No, thank you, Hanan. I agree. Actually, that was really great. If you want to share the list somewhere, or if we could even build a session off of that, that would be awesome. Yeah, I do think that. Obviously, circling back to the overall question, Muslims do need to discuss injustices towards the Black community more often. And clearly we're, inshallah, making our way to discussing in all fairness. But yeah, there are still a lot more issues that we should be discussing wider within our own Muslim spaces and our own Muslim communities. Yeah. Maya or Musa, if you had any other points to add here.
I was gonna say that like I think related to Black Lives Matter and the shooting in Minneapolis, that like I think one thing that I often wish masjids and like Muslim communities would focus on is just like their local community. Like I feel like a lot of the times when there's a fundraiser or when there's like a gathering of resources within a local Muslim community, it's almost always for, and not to say that these are bad causes, but like it's almost always for something overseas, for like Palestine or Syrian refugees, right? And you rarely ever, and most masjids or most like, American cities are like within a 15-minute drive of like an impoverished area, right? And those are arguably communities you can better utilize your resources in because it's right there. Like you can do more than, for those communities, you can do more than just donate money. You can help start a community garden. You can like help bus people around for voting. Like you can make a bigger difference there because your bodies are like right there in a community that like more often than not, at least in my experience, like with the masjid in Champaign, like local community is very helpful and very kind. And so and it would like only be right to like give back to them for that. And more often than not, those impoverished communities are predominantly Black. And I think if more Muslim communities were able to, have relations with those predominantly poor, predominantly African American communities, then just by way of helping them, then I think we would already have had a better understanding of sort of the issues they face just by being in regular contact with them, and this wouldn't necessarily be something that we would have to like explain because we would already have had like in the way that we already like most Muslim people I meet already understand like what is like a very complex socio-political issue in the form of like Palestine and Syria, because that's something that they've often worked and their community has worked their entire lives to like help promote and help the refugees there. And so if we wanted to educate Muslim communities on Black Lives Matter, one way to do that would be to help out Black communities more often, which more often than not we are near if we're in America.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Sorry, I'm just taking notes. Okay. We're already really close to these causes. A lot of masjids are, but they don't really involve themselves within like the Black communities. And as we said earlier, Black Muslims are integral to Muslims in America to begin with. So it really, there's kind of a disconnect between our participation within Black issues and things of that sort versus our history in America to begin with. Yeah, so great thoughts. Musa, would you like to add to this question?
So like yeah, I mean yeah, like Hanan and Umar had made some like really good points. Yeah, they pretty much like cover everything that like I would know or and even more. But I guess like just to like re-say it, I guess like Omar mentioned, like all these other every single cause, like whenever anybody is struggling, like whether it's poverty, whether it's from by the government oppressing them, like those are all really worthy causes, and we should as Muslims like the other extreme of like only helping people out like overseas is like not thinking about them at all, like, and like obviously because like they're not right next to us, we should always keep them in our du'as and like our hearts and our minds. But like I I've also like seen that in the Muslim community that's usually not like that much of a problem, like getting people to care about issues overseas. So like yeah, like Omar mentioned, like those are really important. So like not stopping that, like keeping that going, but then like also like Omar Hanan mentioned, like being involved with like the community right here, like whether it's like they mentioned like lots of like yeah, like the African American community that's like many times like so close, or even like just like the black Muslims in our like the black and African or African American Muslims in our own masjids, because many times like, and especially recently as they've been given like more platforms and stuff, like they've been saying that at their own masjid, like they feel like, or they sense like racism against them, you know what I mean, which is like pretty sad as that like as Muslims, like that's like we shouldn't, that's the exact like opposite of how we should be. But and like I said, I'm like not trying to put anyone down at all, like, but I'm just saying in general, like addressing that issue like within our own selves. And yeah, like Hannah mentioned also, like that's an issue like obviously I'm not a woman myself, so like I haven't really but I have like still seen that like there's definitely probably like some like what's it called, like like double standards, even like some masjids, like they just kind of like not even like they'll just have like a small little section for the prayer and stuff like that. So I guess like it's really important to like reach out to other communities around us, but then also I guess like what the Muslim community, or what we could address in our Muslim communities, is like literally in our own community, like not the masjid like 5 minutes away or like 10 minutes away or 15 minutes, but like in our own masjid, like with the women there, or the African American brothers or the African brothers, like or whoever it is really, like the I know like lots of times converts and even like white Muslims like are like because people always talk about white privilege, which is definitely a thing, you know what I mean? But in the Muslim community, like I feel like what I've heard at least is that lots of white Muslims that convert also feel isolated. So I guess like looking to our own communities and like not necessarily looking to other people, but like starting off with ourselves, like not always just talking to like our friends and like our boys or whatever, but also talking to like other people and people who don't look like us, but people like who we can like even just say salam to, like smile at them, you know what I mean? Just like make them feel like I guess it's not really like a social thing. It's just like being like a good Muslim, a good person, you know what I mean? But I guess like that's what it's uncomfortable to like address, I guess, like for a masjid to be like, yeah, so like there's like, so for a sheikh to look at like the crowd and be like, yeah, like so like some of you guys are racist. I mean, or not like that. I mean, but like, you know what I mean? Like we've heard of like some racism in like this own community, but like if it definitely exists, like I guess maybe we can like address it more. And obviously like I'm not taking shots at anybody. Like all these sheikhs and organizations do so much, and I'm just like chilling here, just like sitting down doing nothing really. But I guess like if you guys feel that way too, then maybe like yourself like stepping out of your way to make those people feel like more welcome, or like if there's something that you can do to, I don't know, whether it's like the African American community in your masjid, or like kind of mention like the sister, like if there's something that's like not there, or a resource that's not there, like taking it on yourself to I guess like helping them like in your own community. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, Musa, you brought up a really good point, especially just marginalization within our masjid itself, the marginalization of communities that happens really often, particularly Black Muslims in our masjids, 100%. That is something that is really hard to really integrate, not integrate, that was a bad choice of words, but yeah, and also converts as well. I do hear a lot of stories in which they feel isolated and not supported by the community around them, which is really, really disheartening. So it does very much reflect on a lot of the work that we can do within our house, within our own masjid and things of that sort. Okay, so I had received a question that kind of jumps off of this point, and we've addressed a few things. So what is something that we as Muslims can do to help the Black community at this time, apart from protesting and signing petitions and donating? Open the floor to anyone or any of our panelists.
I mean like to be honest, like I just went to like a protest and like I haven't really done like much like outside of those like, actually to be honest I haven't even done like those three, like I haven't really like donated anything. But I guess like as important as those three are, like it's definitely a good point. There's like a lot of other ways. So maybe the first step would be to, or like one thing that you could do would be to like yeah, like I guess learn more about the cause, like these causes, and then like Omar mentioned, or like Omar mentioned earlier, lots of times we know like Muslims will know about really complex issues, and like even though they're really complex, they'll still understand every detail because it's just something that like they care about. So I guess like learning more about issue, like if you mentioned specifically for like the Black Lives Matter and like the whole like African American community, like learning more about the struggle that they've been through and like for so long, if we haven't already. And then I guess yeah, I guess like taking more pride in it. Like there's so many, they like I think Hannah Omar mentioned, like there's so many African American Muslims who are like literally like the history of Islam in this country, like whether it's like Malcolm X, whether it's Muhammad Ali, whether it's Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, with like he was like the first like I don't want to say dude, but like the first man who who sat down for the national anthem. So like I guess even though like they're not necessarily people that look like us, like they're Muslims just like us, you know, they believe the same things, they go to the masjids, and they live in the same country. So like I guess besides protesting or donating or I forgot what the other one was, like actually like taking a lot of pride in like their accomplishments, and like recognize, like I guess I don't want to say like taking them, like I'm not saying like taking them for ourselves, but like being proud of them, and like it's something that as Muslims is also part of our history too. Uh um yeah, other than that, I guess like just to go back to what I said earlier, like really making sure that like 'cause I guess I wanted to say like not just for your community members around you, but sometimes like if you even feel like you're not being like too that welcoming for like anybody else, like like Black Muslims or white Muslims in your own masjid, going out of your way to make sure you're like that, you're being like friendly, kind, and like going out of your way to like do all that too. So if that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you, Alhamdulillah. Looks like Hanan is taking a moment. Maya, if you had an answer to what else you could do for our Black community right now?
Yeah, I think one thing I was thinking about beyond like, obviously like local organizing and helping out the community, you can I think masjids and Muslim communities are often a really good space for education. Right, you have khutbas, you have like just generally gatherings where you talk about tafsir or whatever, and you can similarly utilize those spaces to educate yourself about Black issues. And I think the root of a lot of sort of disconnect between the Muslim community here and the Black community comes from a lot of the Muslim community here is an immigrant community, and I think it's these often like older people coming in as immigrants aren't always as well educated as maybe like the youth are on exactly like how racial dynamics work in this country and why it's important that we stand with our African American community. And so I think education would be a really good space, and it's not something that would be like off base or unrelated to typical khutbas and stuff, because obviously it's American Muslim history is Black American history, like they're intertwined.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. There's so many spaces for education within Muslim organizations, Muslim communities, things of that sort. Lots of things that we could do here as well, like through our IMSA Youth reach. So yeah, inshallah, education is really a good start. Hanan, did you have any points to add here?
Yeah, something really quick. Basically, everything else I said. Education is such a big thing that we can do, but not just like a one-time thing. Like we shouldn't just, with the momentum that has been gained, like picking up a book, like consistently in the future, we should strive to always stay educated and like learn more things. There's so many great resources out there. Something that I would say is looking for ways to talk about injustice and challenge anti-Blackness in any space that you can. I know it's hard to think of like a random way to do that. Like I'm not just gonna pull up and be like, oh, let's talk about systemic oppression. But for example, as was said in my like bio or whatever, speech and debate is like a really big part of my life right now. And like my speech sophomore year, I tried to gear that towards on the topic of injustice, and I was able to kind of talk about my experience at that event that I talked about earlier. And it was really cool because people would ask me about it afterwards, and that's just a small thing that I could do. And I can't imagine if everybody I knew took the time to kind of talk about these things and bring these up in conversation, because I know that injustice obviously happens on a wide scale, on a systemic level, but we can also do our part to challenge it individually on an individual basis. And that means, again, kind of finding ways to talk about it in the spaces that you are in.
That's a really great point. Yeah. And I also think that we've covered a lot of ways that these injustices are applicable within our own circles, and we can address them in our communities, and just firsthand like how to do that through raising conversations, through asking questions, things of that sort, through spaces like this. So yeah, inshallah. Okay, so let me just go through these questions right here. There's one question that I have a little bit of that I would like to promo something about first. So the question is how to explain to parents about the just general racism and probably anti-Blackness, just because that also exists within our own communities. Like, let's be real. within our own homes. So yeah, something that I would like to add on this note is that there is, I don't know if you guys have seen this, there's Letters for Black Lives, which essentially just like breaks down the issues of Black communities and police brutality, but applies it in a way that is understandable for our parents and our communities. And there is a version that was just really recently translated, and it's really specific for Indonesian Muslim families. I'll link it in the chat below, and I'll try to provide it elsewhere. But yeah, it's really good. I would say that's a good starting point to try to address it. Yeah, but so our panelists, how would you suggest approaching the subject of anti-Blackness or racism within our homes? Hanan, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Okay. I think first off, it depends on your family too, and like who you're speaking to. You should probably first read the room yourself. You know, different approaches for different people and different families. But I think it can be hard to have people close to you not understand these things. But I think first trying to understand why they think the way they think, just to get in their mind. And what I've noticed in my experiences speaking with people on things like this that they might not understand or have little exposure to, you just have to do it gradually, and it's not gonna happen overnight. You have to pick your battles too. You know, you're not gonna go from like not understanding Black Lives Matter to being like defund the police. You know, so just staying educated yourself and making sure you are reading the room and understanding how much they understand, because it is a process. And if you want that change and you want that understanding to be sustainable and long term, you need to make sure it's done in a meaningful way. I don't know, that was really vague, but
no, I think that was a really good point, especially the point about it really is one step at a time. Like my parents, who I think are on here, they're with Black Lives Matter, but then when we talk about when me and Umar talk about like abolishing the police, they're like, wait. So it really is. Abenome, if you see this, just ignore it. But it really is like one step at a time. Reading the room is a really big part as well, because you can't just come in really hard and expect them to understand where you're coming from. But yeah, okay, Umar, Musa.
All right, so yeah, I mean, yeah, Hannah made some like really good points.
Musa, you just muted yourself.
All right, my bad.
You're okay.
All right. But so like where did I guess I'll just start from the beginning. I don't think I already said that much. But yeah, like I think, yeah, so like obviously Hannah made some like really good points about like, yeah, like I think she said like reading the room, like recognizing like, I guess like first of all, like knowing that like your parent, like all of our parents, or like lots of parents, inshallah, like really were really patient with, you know, their kids and like with us growing up, you know what I mean? Like they had to probably explain stuff to us or like to me like 50 times, 100 times before like I even understood it. So like for the first thing is like, and like, yeah, it starts with my, like I'm just saying it to myself first, is like whenever you like bring up anything with your parents, like, yeah, like just being really respectful, and like just because they might not see like the exact same way that you're seeing, it doesn't mean like they're like racist people or like anything like that. It's just maybe it's, I guess, maybe a little bit different. I guess like one thing that I've heard a lot though, like coming from anyone who's come from, like many of our families are immigrant families, and like many people in our communities might be immigrant communities too. I guess like one thing that I've heard is that, like, I guess I could specifically touch on is like sometimes people might view it like, you know, like and it makes sense because they come from countries and places where like there's a lot of poverty, and or for example, like refugees come from, like if a refugee is coming from somewhere like Palestine or Syria, and like I'm not I'm forgetting other places too, but like where there's literally like bombs that can like attack their homes at like any minute. So they kind of view it like when they look at poverty here, I've heard like people are like, man, like they be having like their phones, Wi-Fi, like how's that a struggle? How's that but at the same time, like although I'm not like I think like the main thing to address that point is that it's not like a competition, you know what I mean? It's not like this person's struggling more than this person, you know what I mean? Like this cause is more worthy than this cause, but what it's about is, or like I guess a way to address it, and again just be patient, is kind of being like, yeah, like first of all, like you have to acknowledge that definitely that there are struggles all around the world. Like you shouldn't try to deny that just because something that you haven't had to live next to or live through. But after like like accepting that, like you can be like, yeah, but that doesn't, like, how is that related, because that's like, how is that related to what's going on here, you know what I mean? Because I know I feel like I hear that like a decent amount, not like specifically from my parents, but from like immigrants in general, that like it doesn't really seem like people here are like, or like people in poverty here or people going through certain stuff here are really struggling compared to like back home or in certain places. But at the end of the day, like, it's just, if someone's struggling, period, you know what I mean, even if it's just your friend or like someone in your house, like you should like always be out there to help, just be there to help them. I mean, I know I'm kind of sounding corny probably, but I guess like the way to address like that specific thing about um like comparing it to problems in around the world that might seem like they're a lot worse, like you should like, I guess just being like, yeah, like I understand that, but we're here in America, like I feel like my black brother, my black sisters, my friends, they're going through a struggle, and like I feel like we should care about that too. And saying that in like a really kind way, and then like I guess maybe like if you're respectful and nice, it could like help start that conversation.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good way to. I think it's the framing really is what you're trying to get at there. That's really like make it a way that is applicable for your parents to understand. Omar, did you want to answer? Did you want to answer the question on how to talk to your parents about like anti-Blackness and general racism?
Sure. Like you pointed out, alhamdulillah, I have parents that are very open to dialogue and conversation with political ideas, but obviously, like, not everybody's in that space. Not everybody has the opportunity to be open to debate. And I think oftentimes you sort of have to decide for yourself whether or not it necessarily, because I don't think you're obligated. If you're like a 15-year-old living at home with your parents and you're like dependent on them, I don't think you're obligated to fight with them about anti-Blackness if it can like put you in a untenable position. But if you can, I think specifically with like, I mean, some strategies, like, I don't know, dads really like to read like history books and like history documentaries and stuff. And if you can like read up on that and sort of like bolster your argument, that'll sort of help reach, get to them from like, because I think how they're seeing it is like, you're just like kids, you don't understand, you just like want all this ideals. But then if you come with, oh, actually there's been like substantial evidence of like why the black community ended up this way and why defunding the police would be bad, then like then they'll understand that you are also, an adult who has, or a young adult that has the information and knows what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think we're gonna do one last question now. Thank you for that, Omar. By the way, my father would like to say that he does agree with defunding the police and that I misspoke, so apologies. Anyways, so one more question is, there's also some stigma and fears with being just sort of living as a Muslim in America. So how do you overcome and handle that aspect all while still being active politically and socially? Whoever wants to take that on.
Wait, Zahra, can you repeat the question?
Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack there.
So I guess just combining our own stigmas as just existing as a Muslim in a Western country, how do you overcome that while still being active politically and socially. So thinking maybe like the intersections of supporting other people, things of that sort. Okay. Sure.
So like yeah, like that's a really good question. I get like so in terms of like experiencing Islamophobia and like also at the same time like being active and stuff like that is that's definitely yeah, it's definitely like a big issue, and it's a really good question. I guess in terms of like how to deal in terms of how to deal with like Islamophobia specifically, like I mean obviously I'm not like I'm like probably like less qualified than like everyone here, but I guess my take on it would be that for me personally I guess the main things that's come from is like I don't know, maybe like praying in public or like making wudu and stuff like that. I don't know if I don't know if I'm like completely like not like answering the question, but is that what you mean by like Islamophobia? Like is that like, or am I like taking it the wrong way?
No, open to your own interpretation, Musa.